October 24th, 2015. We're at the home of Mr. Jack Hamlin, a retired Coast Guard veteran. Mr. Hamlin lives in Springfield, Missouri, and we have the pleasure of meeting with him today to discuss his life before the war, during the war, and after the war. Mr. Hamlin, I would thank you very much for coming to meet with us and inviting us to your home. I'd like to speak to you about your career from childhood up until today. I'd like you to tell me about growing up in Missouri. Where did you grow up in Missouri?
I was born and raised right here in Springfield, Missouri, 1921. I lived on what we call the north side of Springfield, Missouri, and most people at that time called it the Rabbit Patch. There's two parts of Springfield, Missouri, population probably around 70,000 people at that time. And I was raised on the north side. I went to a grade school called Bowerman School. I went to a school called Reed Junior High School. I went to a high school, and at that time we only had one high school. I graduated in a class in 1939 in high school of 624 students. Now, a lot of people that I've ran into and met, they went to a small school. Maybe their class they graduated from was maybe 35, 40 people. When I tell them that I graduated in a class of over 600, it's amazing what they want to know. But as I say, I lived here all my life. I started to go to college in Springfield, Missouri. I started out at Drury University. It's right here in Springfield. I started in school there in 1939. And in 1939, I also, let me back up a little bit there. After I got out of high school, the first year, 1939, Tom Greenway, the Yankee baseball scout, knew something about me, and asked me if I would like to join the Yankee organization, play in the minor leagues. I signed a contract with the Yankees and played in Joplin, Missouri, called the Joplin Miners, not far from my hometown, only 60 miles away. After I played that year, I started to play the next year, and some way or another I caught a disease called rheumatic fever. Rheumatic fever, I weighed approximately 150 pounds. I got down to 86. And after the illness took me over and I recovered, I was discovered that I had an enlarged heart. About that time, the war was declared at Pearl Harbor, and naturally much of the boys, we all wanted to go join. I actually wanted to get into the Naval Air Corps. I took the examinations, thought I passed everything, but one little thing, the physician told me I had to come back the next day to take a electrocardiogram on my heart. At that time, I had no idea that my enlarged heart would keep me from being an aviator. But as I look back at now, I spent 4 years, almost 4 years in the United States Coast Guard. And if I'd been a pilot, knowing myself how I was kind of risque and took a lot of chances. I probably wouldn't be here today if I'd gone to the Naval Air Corps. So I can be thankful in a sort of a way, to say that I did get into the United States Coast Guard. I enjoyed it very much. I took training in Algiers, in New Orleans, just outside of New Orleans. That's where I took my training. I was sent to Boston, Massachusetts after I received my training. In Boston, Massachusetts, they asked me if I'd like to go to candidate school for boatswain mate. And a boatswain mate I can describe to you just nothing more than a petty officer, really. And there's no authority as far as that being a commissioned officer. And I said yes, so I went to New York. Well, when I was in boatmate school, of all people, who was commander there was Jack Dempsey, the old heavyweight boxer. I met Jack Dempsey. Several boys did, of course. I was in the service. And also, while I was there was a boy by the name of Voris. And he was a football player back in Springfield, Missouri, that I knew very well. And he was the athletic director at Manhattan Beach in New York. I enjoyed it very much because on the weekends, he knew I was a baseball player, and I got to play baseball and got freedom on the weekends.
You know, I have to tell you, you just celebrated a birthday, did you not?
Yes, sir.
And that was your 94th birthday?
94th, just 15th of October.
Now, at your age, at 94, your recall of facts, dates, your memory of names of people is just phenomenal.
I appreciate that very much. And there have been other people ask me, how do you remember all those things? Well, I try to remember the good things and not all the bad things that I did, but it comes back very easy to me, really, of the good times I've had and the bad times I've had.
We're going to talk about growing up in Missouri for a little
Yes,
while.
sir.
You love your state and you love your town.
I do.
Tell me, when Pearl Harbor was attacked, do you remember where you were that day?
I certainly do. I was at the post office. I had an aunt whose husband worked at the post office, and he asked me to come down. And that was the idea I got about the Naval Air Corps, because he was the one suggested to me, now there's a war going on, do you want to be drafted? And I hadn't even thought about it until I talked to my aunt's husband. And he mentioned to me about Pearl Harbor and so on. I said, yes, yes, yes. He said, if you want to do something, you ought to go into the Naval Air Corps. That's how I got the idea to go into the Naval Air Corps instead of being drafted.
Tell me something.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned you were at the post office, but
Yes, sir.
specifically, where were you when you heard the news? Did you hear it from this gentleman at the post office, or were you at school? Where were you exactly, if you can recall that?
As a matter of fact, I can remember it. We were playing baseball, a few of us, in my front yard. We were just playing catch and around, and my mother called me, and she'd heard it on the radio. And that's when I was alerted. My mother told me about it.
And she told you about it. Now tell me, did you know where Pearl Harbor was?
I had no idea. No, I had no idea. Pearl Harbor, to me, was a name, and that's all I knew.
Right. And did you realize that it was the Japanese that attacked the island?
Nothing came to me at all till days later after I started reading about it and more information. Because my mother, I don't think she really knew what was really happening. She just happened to hear the news, knew it was bad, and knew I was a certain age that I'd be called sooner or later.
Right. Now, you've already completed high school.
Yes, sir.
In Pearl Harbor, and that was 1939.
1939.
And 41, you were already in college.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Yes, sir.
And the college that you were in again at that time?
Drury University here in Springfield, Missouri.
So you were most likely a sophomore?
I was a sophomore at that time, yes.
Right. And you were 6 months away from going to your junior class once you finished that sophomore class.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
So you've heard about Pearl Harbor. It's 1941. Your friends and everyone are talking about, we're going to get those Japanese. And what was the sentiment from your friends and things you heard? How were the Japanese referred to? Because it was obviously a sneak attack. We lost over 3,000 men. America did nothing to initiate the attack. We were a country that was an isolationist country. And here you are. What was the sentiment? What was going on? What were your friends talking about at that time?
Really, that part I can't remember too much. All I remembered is everybody saying what service they were thinking about going in. Most of the people that I was with at that time were right at the age where they would be inducted into the service. But most I can remember, I don't think we ever discussed the Japanese, anything against them. We really were so young, and we weren't mad at them yet. We actually didn't know the demolition and the death that occurred and how bad it was really going to be. All we were really thinking about, what branch of service do we want to go in? Can we go in together as far as this? And when I say going together, there was, on my block, there's 12 boys that went into the service. Only 5 of us returned.
The branches of service that they entered into?
I had 3 of them went to the Marine Corps. 2 of them survived Iwo Jima. Bill Blevins, the one that's deceased, he was killed on D-Day, the invasion of Iwo Jima. I had a boy right across the street that went into the Army. He was in St. Lo. He was killed in St. Lo. I had a cousin up in the corner.
Do you remember his name?
His name was Bill James. The
Bill
one was
James.
killed in St. Lo.
And
Yes.
what street did you live on?
North Douglas.
North Douglas.
It also was called Demington Place. A lot of people knew it was Demington Place because there's a large house built on the premises of North Douglas, and they wanted to call it Demington Place because he put spatial from one end of the street to the other. He put spatial big railings up, and they wanted to name the street Demington Place, but the city said no, it had to be North Douglas.
So we're talking now about 2 of the boys, one killed at St. Lo.
Yes, sir.
In France. And
My cousin, and his name was Mac Waller, and he was at Bastogne. He survived Bastogne.
so now that we've mentioned two of the young men that were killed. Now a few of them went into the Marines.
Yes.
From the neighborhood.
3 of them went into the Marines.
Right. Now when you said they lived in your neighborhood, so within blocks of one another.
One block. The funny part is one block. It is now what they call 2 blocks. It's large enough that it becomes 1800 block and 1900 block of North Douglas in Springfield now. But it was 1800 block then. Several houses, but there was actually 12 boys that went into the service.
Right. Now a few of those were Marines.
3 of them. Just 3 were Marines.
Right. Now they were at Iwo Jima, I believe.
At Iwo Jima. That's where one of them was killed on Iwo Jima, and the other 2 survived, and they came back home.
And they came back home.
Yes, sir.
Was there also a young man that was severely wounded that came back home?
There was a boy that was injured, and I couldn't tell you exactly where he was, but he came back to Fort Riley. We had a place here called the Medical Center for boys coming back from the service. A lot of them had special cuts all over their faces, and I guess Springfield, Missouri had 2 doctors that were specializing in that. That's why they were sent here. As a matter of fact, my daughter's father-in-law was wounded in the Alps the same time that Bob Dole was injured. I mean, he's with him in that part. And he lives here in Springfield in a rest home. And he came back to Springfield, Missouri to O'Reilly Hospital to recuperate. And while he was here, he met a nurse. And he got married and stayed in Springfield, Missouri. Now, I couldn't tell you exactly what state he was from during the service. But when he came to Springfield, when he fell in love with the nurse and was treated here at O'Reilly Hospital, he stayed in Springfield, Missouri. Thank goodness, because that...
Right. Bob Dole was in the 10th Mountain Division.
That's right.
And do you think this gentleman was also in the 10th Mountain?
That's what he was in, yes, sir.
And what was his name again?
His name is Donnell, Fred Donnell.
Donnell.
Yes.
Would that last name be spelled D-O-N-E?
E-double-L.
E-double-L. Okay, we'll do some research into that because...
As a matter of fact, you'll meet his son tonight, and you get to talk to him a little about it also.
Right. And what's his son's name?
It's Greg. Greg Donnell. You'll have to take my son-in-law's name.
So, just one block in a small, or at that time Springfield
Yes,
was
sir.
one of the largest communities with 70,000 people.
Yes.
But that one particular block, the 1800 block, which today is known as the 18 and 1900 block.
That's right.
12 boys that went into the service, the community lost 5 boys from that little area.
Exactly right.
And that was a sacrifice just from one little corner of Springfield, Missouri, of losing young men. What about your high school class? Have you ever heard the statistics of the boys that graduated from high school
No,
that you knew that didn't come home?
No, one mate of mine, Hal Hawkins, he was a survivor of Baton Rouge. He was in the Marines. Gene Wilkerson was in the Navy. He was a good friend of mine. He was killed on a destroyer in the Pacific. Howard Sullivan was captured in Germany, and he was shot while he was in a concentration camp.
When you say a concentration camp, do you mean he was shot in a Stalag?
No, it was just a POW camp.
It was a prisoner of war camp.
Prisoner of war camp.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
Okay. So and they shot him.
And I understand he was shot while he was in the prisoner of war camp. Now, that story was told by several of my classmates that they found out later.
Okay. And his name exactly?
His name was Howard Sullivan.
Howard Sullivan, and
Yes.
he was from
Missouri.
Missouri.
Yes.
Springfield.
And he was in part of the Army. I couldn't tell you what division or anything else, but
Right.
he was in the Army.
So then I'm sure after the war, after you came home and meeting up with friends, people you didn't see, and saying, hey, I was in the Coast Guard, and these guys were here, and you start talking, and then you might have said something like, hey, whatever happened to
Right.
this person or that person? And that's how the information filtered back to you. And sometimes it may have taken more than a year or 2 years before you really found out what happened to this classmate.
Oh, it's true. It took several years before I found a lot of them. And I couldn't tell you exactly how many was deceased. But I know it was over 50 in my class that was lost. Of course, I'm served, most of us served as far as that. Matter of fact, when I went into the Coast Guard, and I wasn't able to get in the Naval Air Corps, there was 3 friends of mine that I'd played baseball with in high school, and they were going to go in the Coast Guard. I didn't ask them why or anything. They said, well, we know you were turned down, Jack. Why don't you go with us and go in the Coast Guard? So that's when I said, all right. And Manny, I'll tell you something. I don't ever remember, I'm sure I did, but I don't ever remember taking a physical examination for the Coast Guard. I'm positive that they must have given it to me to this day, and I recollect a lot of things. But I don't ever remember taking a physical examination. Not that I regret it or anything. I got in, it was wonderful. It was wonderful service. But in the training, I had terrific training in New Orleans, and all in small boats. And when I got to Boston, I went to boatswain school. Then from the boatswain school, I went directly to Newport, Rhode Island, and was put on in my 83-foot cutter, which I took over but I went with to England and then to Normandy for the invasion.
Let's go back to enlisting for the Coast Guard.
All right.
Where did you go down to enlist? Do you recall where you went?
Right here in Springfield.
Okay. Was there a certain area? Was it a courthouse?
The Federal Building.
It was at the Federal
Building.
So after you went down there to enlist, you came home and you told your parents, Mom, Dad, I'm going to be in the Coast Guard.
Yes.
What was their reaction?
Well, Mother didn't want me to go. My father served in the First World War. He was in France also, wasn't wounded or anything. But you know how mothers are naturally. But I was old enough, I was 21 years of age. So she knew that I'd be drafted or something else. And one thing I didn't want to do, and I didn't have enough sense to know about this or think about it, I never heard of paratroopers until later on. But I didn't want to be in a submarine and go underneath the water. I didn't want to be an infantryman because I read enough about the foxholes in books and World War I and what you go through there. I didn't want to do that. So when the Coast Guard idea came to me from my 3 friends, that's decided because they say you'll be on a boat, probably have white sheets, you have a good place to eat and sleep, and you won't have to be in a foxhole or you won't have to be underneath the water. So that's why I decided in the Coast Guard.
Okay, so you went home. How much time did you have before you had to actually leave to go for your basic training?
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Now, these other 2 fellows
Yes.
that enlisted to the Coast Guard,
Yes.
they left at the same time you did?
We all 3 got on the train, was shipped right down to
Okay.
New
Where did you
Orleans.
get on the train?
In Springfield, Missouri. We had train service at that time. And it went directly we went to St. Louis. From here to go to St. Louis, we got on a train to go directly to New Orleans.
Now, did anybody from your family accompany you?
No, just to the railroad station, that was it.
To the local station?
Our local station, and put me on the train.
Right. So who was there?
My mother, my sister, and my dad.
Okay.
And I believe one of my aunts. My mother's sister was with us.
Okay. So how many siblings did you have in your family?
I have 3. I have only in my family.
Yes.
I have only one sister.
Only one sister.
Yes, one sister and I.
And so it's only 2 of you.
Just the 2 in the family.
Okay. So there were no brothers that went off to service.
No, just myself.
Other than yourself and your sister. Did she do anything with respect to the war effort? Did she want to become a nurse because her brother went off?
No, she did. She did go to St. Louis, and she worked in the U.S. Arms plant. There was a plant there, and she worked at that plant as a secretary. And then she got married to a doctor in Springfield, Missouri, Dr. Archlow Jr., and he was ready to go into the service also at that time. And they got married just before he went into the service.
So now you're on this train heading to St. Louis with your 2 buddies.
Yes, sir.
What happened then after that?
Well,
You arrived in St. Louis.
I remember everything, but of course we were barracked. We put into a hotel until we got the train. I think we spent just the overnight there. And we were all excited, and there were several others got on the train at the same time we did, naturally. And I don't remember, probably soldiers too, everything else going to certain places on this train. But the 4 of us, the 3 boys and myself, we enjoyed it. We got to New Orleans, we played together. As I say, all of us played baseball in the high school together. And when we got to New Orleans, we were put on a baseball team, and we got to play baseball in New Orleans. And we were there for about 90 days taking training.
Now you were, your favorite position I think was second baseman?
Base, yes.
Okay, so being a second baseman, did you take your glove with you to the service?
No, I didn't take any. No, they gave us equipment, all right. That was one thing. But
So,
you had to buy
so your
equipment.
favorite glove, what was it, a Rawlings?
It was short fingered. Couldn't even remember the name. It was a short fingered glove, not like they are today, but they were just as small as my,
Was it 5 fingers on that glove?
I even had a 3-finger glove.
You even had a 3-finger
I sure
glove.
even had a 3-finger glove.
So you doubled up some fingers in some of the
yes, sir.
finger slots.
Absolutely.
All right. So now you're in New Orleans, and all 4 of you want to stick together. How well did that go?
It went good, really good, honestly. We were very good friends until the day we had to leave. And one of the boys he loved horses. He did stay in the States, and he was one of those that rode horses up and down the coast. Bob Westervelt got on a small destroyer, Coast Guard destroyer, and Bill Woolley, and he was a musician. I mean, he was good. He could sing, he played all kinds of instruments. He even tried to write music when he was in high school. He got into a band. So he played in a band, some camp, I don't know where, but he stayed in the band most of the time. And I think I'm the only one that really, I know of our 4, that got to see any action, I'll put it that way.
So, joining the Coast Guard, okay, did you have any idea that the American Coast Guard would actually go into action, cross the Atlantic, or go into the Pacific, and go to Europe when we had the U.S. Navy there? Did you feel that you would be called up one day to go to...
I actually thought that I'd be just what I was doing, 83 footers. We were doing nothing but submarine work off the East Coast. I had most of my friends say, hey, you got in the Coast Guard, you'll never see action. Nothing you're going to do, Jack, you're going to stay here. Well, I said, that's wonderful, I'll stay here, I won't get to see action. And terrible to say, but if I didn't get to see action, that'd have been all right with me. I shouldn't say that, but that's the way I'm sure that I felt being a young boy. I didn't care about being killed. So I did, but...
And you were like many young boys who wanted to come home.
Oh, yes.
You know?
I had a chance at the end to go to the academy. I was asked by
the Naval Academy?
The Coast Guard Academy.
Okay.
See, as a matter of fact, the Coast Guard was taken over by the Navy in November of 1941. We were no longer Coast Guard. We took all our orders from the Navy. Everything the Coast Guard did came out of a naval order. We were still called the Coast Guard, but the Navy took us over, and we received all of our direct orders there.
Jack, you were 21 years old when you joined the Coast Guard. I'd like to know, at that age, was there a sweetheart that you left at home?
Well, yes, there was a girl that I really liked, but it's kind of a funny story. I'd gone with this young girl. Well, I'll brag about it, I had 2 girlfriends. I had this one girl that I was going with, and I was dating her, and my mother didn't know about it, but she was just in junior high school. I'd met her through her brother, who was a college friend of mine, and through high school. We were in the same fraternity, and he had his sister come by one day, and I thought, well, she's a good-looking girl, and I asked him, I said, do you mind if I date your sister sometime? Well, he knew I was kind of a rascal, and he said, well, it's up to her. So I asked the little girl, I said, would you ever date me sometime? And she said yes, and we had 2 or 3 dates. Well, I had a great aunt that lived in California, and she liked my mother. She didn't have any children, but she was a school teacher. She worked at a college. And also, she was a special tutor to Shirley Temple, the little actress. Now, she was a tutor for her. She was my great aunt.
What was her name?
Her name was Pearl Hamlin. And her father was congressman here in Springfield, Missouri, for the U.S. Congress for 19 years.
And his first name?
His name was Courtney Hamlin. C.W. Hamlin. Courtney Hamlin. He's my grandfather. They were all lawyers.
Tell me something about Courtney Hamlin. Where was he buried?
He's buried right here in Springfield, Missouri, and his 2 daughters are buried right beside him, out at East Lawn Cemetery.
East Lawn?
East Lawn Cemetery in Springfield, Missouri.
Okay.
They brought him back here to bury him.
So, let's talk about the girlfriend now.
All right. Her name was Margaret Jezzard. And my aunt asked, well, how's Jack's sister doing, Alice Louise? Well, Alice Louise was a brain. She was in Little Theater. She was on TV. She made great speeches. As a matter of fact, she went down to the University of Georgia and established the Pi Beta Phi Girls chapter down at the University of Georgia. Then she came home, and my Aunt Pearl said, well, how's Alice Louise doing? Well, she's doing real good. She's just getting ready to graduate from Drury College. How about Jack? Well, Jack's getting ready to go play baseball again. He had signed a minor league contract with the New York Yankees, and he's not doing too good in school, but he's going with a pretty little girl. and my aunt just happened to ask Mary, my mother, what's her name? And he told her name was Margaret Jesuit. Well, that hit my Aunt Pearl, and she said, that name, I recall that name. I think I graduated from her with her mother at Drury College. Well, Pearl asked my mother, well, how old is Margaret? Well, Pearl knew how old she was. She said, well, Mary, that girl is only 14 or 15 years old. My mother caught me aside and said, Jack, I found out how old that little girl is. You cannot go with her anymore. So that stopped us from going with each other. But the main story is now, after 76 years, and Margaret, she married a wonderful fellow named Charles Banta, and he was an airline pilot. He was a naval pilot himself. And they got married, and he passed away, and my wife passed away 3 years ago. I was married 60 years, and I've known Margaret all the time. We only lived about a block apart, even while we were married. And I see her all the time. And I asked her, would you like to go out with me sometime? Now, Margaret, that you're old enough. We started going together, and for the last 2 years, I've been going with her again, after 76 years.
And her last name is?
Now it's Banta, B-A-N-T-A, but it was Jesuit at that time.
How do you spell Jesuit?
Jezzard.
Uh-huh. So, and during the time, now that you're in the service, okay, Mom said, okay, she was too young for you. So who did you go back to at that point?
Well, there was a girl here at that time.
You had a fallback. You had a fallback girlfriend, right?
I had a girlfriend. Her name was Marjorie Mack in Springfield, Missouri.
And how do you spell Marjorie's last name?
M-A-C-K.
Is Marjorie Mack still alive?
No, she's passed away. She's passed away. But she was a good friend, and I was a good friend of Bob Price, who was on the Price is Right. He's a Springfield boy, and he was a year younger than I. But he was dating a girl, Mary Jo Kidden, who he went ahead and married her. She lived across the street from Marjorie Mack. So once in a while we would get together as far as that's concerned. And I've known Bob for a long time.
Well, Bob's last name was Price?
No, Bob Barker.
Bob Barker.
Bob Barker. But
he was the Price is Right.
Right was a program. He was on TV for a long time.
Right. Excuse me for bringing that up.
No, that's all right.
I thought you mentioned that it was Bob Price.
I think I did say that. There is another Bob Price I know.
Well, that would be
nobody would know that one.
Yeah, that could happen very easily.
That's a little different, yeah.
So, you're away now. I've got you to the point of where you're in New Orleans, okay? And did you communicate together while you were in New Orleans with your girlfriend?
No, did not.
No writings,
now,
nothing?
I put it this way. The Marjorie Mack, the girl that I was going with,
right.
She was in a girls' school down at Gulfport. Her family sent her down there, and I was in New Orleans, but I couldn't get liberty to go see her over there. I could get it on weekend when I was playing baseball, but she couldn't get out of school.
Uh-huh.
But I did know her when I was in New Orleans.
So, if I were to ask you to show me some love letters from those days, are there any love letters that exist?
Not left anymore. I did, truly, I had some up to about 10 years ago, and I destroyed a lot of letters like that. Now, also, when I was in New York, when I was in Newport, Rhode Island, I had a good friend of mine called Jim Lowe. Now, he still lives in New York City now, but he was my sister-in-law, my sister's brother-in-law. He was a Lowe, L-O-W-E. He was on television. He wrote the song Behind the Green Door. He lives in the Hamptons out on Long Island, and I speak with him every month. We have a good friendship. He wants me to come to New York sometime and see him.
You have to.
And
especially if it's the Hamptons. The time to go there, it's almost any time because it's beautiful.
That's
even in the wintertime.
He says the same thing. He says, come on. And he says, even bring your Margaret with you if you want to do that. And we talk quite a bit.
That would be really nice. We'd love to see you out there.
Thank you, Manny.
October 28th, 2015, we're at the home of Mr. Jack Hamlin, U.S. Coast Guard veteran, United States military, veteran of World War II. This is part 2 of Jack's oral history. Jack, thank you again for being here with us and giving us the opportunity to continue the interview. I'd like to start off with Europe. Do you recall when you first arrived in Europe?
I couldn't tell you the exact day. It was during the latter part of April of 1944 we arrived at Poole, England. That was to be our harbor. There were several other U.S. naval ships there also, but of our 60 Coast Guard cutters that were taken there by Liberty ships and some type of cargo ships, we all landed at Poole, England.
A question. You say they were taken there by a Liberty ship.
Yes, sir.
Could you explain that for those that don't understand how your ships were transported?
Yes, sir. We were notified we were going overseas. We got the call to all of us to bring our cutters from the East Coast to Baltimore, Maryland. That Curtis Bay, as a matter of fact, what it was, Curtis Bay. And there we were to be loaded on to Liberty ships on the deck. Our cutters were 83 foot long with a crew of 13. Now there's only 4 crew members that went with the cutter overseas on the Liberty ship. They put 2 of these Coast Guard cutters onto the decks of the Liberty ship. Other Liberty ships took the other ones, and we all went in a Congo at the same time out of Curtis Bay, Maryland.
The cutter.
Yes.
Did you say they were 80 feet long?
83 foot long cutters.
Okay. What kind of armaments were on these cutters?
We had 8 depth charges, and of course they were taken off for the rescue work which we were going to participate in. We had one 20 millimeter gun, and we had 2 50 caliber guns on the deck, and that was our armament.
Okay. Were you one of the 4 men that went on the Liberty ship?
Yes, I went with the ensign, the chief motormate, myself, and our cook went along on the Liberty ship. The rest of them went over by transport.
From the point that you were sailing over on the Liberty ship with the crew of 4 and the other men that you were going to meet, was it a team, or were you other men assigned that you never met before once you arrived in England to your cutter?
Other people I didn't know was right. No, I did not know anybody else on any cutters except myself. There was only 2 cutters out of Newport, Rhode Island, where I was stationed, that went down to Curtis Bay, where we were loaded. So that I had no chance to meet any of the other crew members who were going to go along.
Now you mentioned the port that you arrived in England.
Yes.
And that was?
Poole, England. Poole. Just below Southampton.
Just below Southampton.
Yes, sir.
Do you remember that day when you first saw England and you arrived there?
Well, in a way, I remember it all right, but that I can't relate to how much I was. We were just happy to see land again and to find out where we were actually going to be.
Now that Liberty ship that you went across on, do you recall trying to avoid Germans by zigzagging across the ocean?
Don't remember that at all. I'm sure they did. I don't remember. We took night watch. We were assigned night watch along with the crew of the Liberty ship, and each one of us took night watch. But we did. I found out later we lost 2 Liberty ships. We didn't lose any of our cutters going over, but we lost in the convoy going over to England. We did lose 2 Liberty ships.
Was that a result of German U-boats?
German? No, it was of submarines. To tell you, I don't actually remember what caused it, because the weather was all right going across for our Liberty ships, but it could have been. It had to be submarines, I'd say.
You remember how many days it took you from Rhode Island to...
It was almost 30 days.
30 days traveling on the ocean.
Yes. I couldn't tell you the exact day. I wasn't that much interested. I know I was going someplace. Didn't know yet I was going to Poole, England. We know we were going to England. Of course, we didn't know the specific port we were going to be in.
Tell me, when you arrived in England, did they set you up in naval barracks there?
No. When we got there, we lived right on our little cutters. but there was what they call a fire department just off of the base where we were, and we would take our showers there.
Did you do any type of specific training before that infamous day of June 6th?
No, we did not. You know, that is odd, because some books come out and say it was strenuous training we did. Our crew didn't do a bit of training. All we knew, we didn't even know that yet, what our purpose of being there was, until almost a week after we were there. Then we realized actually that we were going to go in with the small landing barges to the beaches. So see, it took a lot of time. They kept everything from the crew.
Right. Now, during that time, you arrived in England in May?
The latter part of April.
Latter part of April.
Yes, sir.
So from April to June 6th, what were you doing most of that time?
Just preparing ourselves, having meetings, staying aboard the ship, meeting the English people. We got to see some of the soldiers were there, and there's quite a few of them just near us, big barracks. They also stayed, most of them stayed in private homes.
Did you get any liberty to go into London or into Southampton?
No, not before the invasion. We did not. We stayed right there in Poole, England.
They kept you at that base?
Yes, they did.
Okay. June 4th, June 5th.
Yes.
Do you remember anything special about those days before the day of the invasion?
Isn't that funny you bring that up? I really don't. We were just all excited. We finally got our instructions from our skipper. He'd been to a meeting, and we were told what we were going to do. That we were going to go all in a convoy to France, and then be divided, going to Utah Beach, and the other part going to Omaha Beach. And they told us specific instructions at this time that you're going to go in with the landing barges and the LSTs. Now when you go alongside them, you stay out of their way to make sure they get to the beaches. But the only time you get into them is to go in and save any of the crew that happen to be in the water or that their landing barges are damaged.
I find it very interesting because this part of our military history, the actions that were taken by the U.S. Coast Guard to be prepared for any mishap with the landing barges, if men were overboard, it's hardly ever spoken about.
Yes, sir.
It's not shown in the movies. Even in the movies of Saving Private Ryan or Band of Brothers, I don't recall seeing U.S. Coast Guard boats, these cutters, coming alongside. All I remember is men in the water, men being blown out of their boats and trying to get to shore. But the actions that were taken by men like yourself in the Coast Guard seems to be put to the side or forgotten about. And I need you to make sure that that part of history is really not forgotten. So what I'm going to ask you is, on June 6th, that morning, at 6 a.m. in the morning, where were you at that time?
We were told to leave out of Poole, England, to go out to what they call Weymouth Island. That was the starting point to meet our convoy and join them. That's when we started. And one little story, I knew a friend of mine I played football and baseball with in high school, and his name was Ralph Carter. And he was a lieutenant on one of the LSTs that were going from Poole, England, going to the beaches. Well, it was dark, of course, at that time that we were going over. And I only knew he was on LST 50. And just by luck, here it is, there's 5,000 ships going across. Our little Coast Guard cutters were going on as a convoy going alongside of them, and they couldn't go but only about 10 knots going across. Our top speed was 22, but we'd have to go up a little bit, turn around, come back, and stay right alongside. One moment, I turned around and I looked up, and I saw the number LST 50 on this LST. And I knew that Ralph Carter was aboard. So just me and my loud mouth, I pulled alongside. And I asked the ensign, our commander, I said, let's go up near that boat there. He did for me. And I yelled out, do you happen to have a Lieutenant Carter aboard this boat? And somebody yelled, yes, we do. Who's this? And I said, this is Jack Hamlin from Springfield, Missouri. I know Ralph Carter. Well, he was skipper of this LST. They finally got a hold of him, and he came on, and he yelled down, "Who is this?" It's dark, of course, and he couldn't see me. And he said, "Who is it?" And I said, "Ralph, this is Jack Hamlin." He said, "What are you doing in that rowboat?" And I'll never forget this. I said, "Ralph Carter, I'll tell you right now, you're a lieutenant, and I'm just a little seaman, but if your ship goes down, you'll be the last one that I will pick up out of the water." Well, I could hear, really, on his LSD, I could hear some of the crew have a good time with it. I never saw Ralph again. He survived and went on to be an FBI man, but I met two of his crew later on, and they remembered for me calling out about him. It's just one of those things during the war, but just by luck, out of 5,000, all kinds of ships, I pulled alongside in the dark, and there was LSD 50.
You're in the water, the ships are going in. Were you being shot at that moment, and when did they start shooting at you? How close were you to the beaches?
The closest we ever got was a mile. We didn't get right into the beach at all. We had enough to do where we were. The casualties, I would say a lot of the boats were being swamped.
Swamp?
Swamp. It was real bad. It was bad.
The seas?
It was about a 6 sea. Now that's pretty good. That's a lot of water. It's really rough. And those little landing barges, they only had about 1.5 foot or 2 feet draw underneath them so they get the beaches. So they were very hard to handle. And I heard these stories before that even some of the soldiers got so seasick they jumped overboard from these little craft. Now I couldn't tell you if we saved any of those or not, but in our journey of all the beaches, it was 1,486 men that we saved that day. That all our 60 cutters.
The total cutters.
The total cutters.
Now, these men that you were saving, you're a mile out off the beaches. Why would there be men so far out? Were there boats, their landing crafts, were they hit by artillery that they blew up? Or, as you said, they were swamped. So you saw these boats all of a sudden being swamped. Men are wearing their life jackets for the most part, is that correct?
Very small life, yes.
Okay. So the boats are being swamped. Are these the men you're saving, the ones that are coming off the boats that are being swamped by water?
They're the ones. And also some of the landing barges were being hit by gunfire naturally from the shore. See, they started about 10 miles out. They kept the transports and they kept the hospital ships 10 miles off of the beaches because of the German artillery. And that's where they had to start from. So they had a long ways to go to get in. And they couldn't go any faster than just about 11 knots. It's very slow. And in that rough sea, there's a lot of these soldiers that got seasick. And of course, a lot of them were wounded and shot up before they got to the beaches.
Now, once they got to within a mile's range, those machine guns were able, from the bunkers, were able to reach them?
I don't think they could. The closest the machine guns could reach them was no more than probably 500 yards off the beaches. I was not a gunnery man or didn't know that much about how far they could shoot them up. I only knew the 8 millimeters and all those big, large cannons would shoot them that far.
Right. Now, do you recall picking up the first man?
I certainly do.
Tell me about that first man.
The first man that we went and get out of the water was wounded pretty badly. Of course, he had his uniform on, and you couldn't tell him what the wounds were. So we weren't worried about that. The thing was to get him as fast as we could onto our little cutter. And it was rough. That was the hard part, is getting him to the boat, then having the large boys on my boat pick them up. Now we had to get more of them to go back. So after we rescued the man, we had to go 10 miles back to the hospital ships, which took an awful lot of time. It wasn't your decision to say, well, this man lived long enough till we get him back to the hospital ships.
Well, what made that decision? How did you know when to stop picking people up? When your boat was loaded with men, did you wait, or some of the men were so badly wounded you knew that if you don't get them back to that hospital ship, they're just not going to make it?
See, I had an ensign was in charge, and all that was left to him. I'm sure he had the instructions on that. The most I can remember, having aboard our cutter, taken back to the hospital we went, was about 11 men. We were busy picking them up as far as that. But there were only 11 that I can remember.
Were they on top of the deck?
On top of the deck.
Okay.
They didn't go down below or anything like that. They've been tough getting on our little cutter. Really tough pushing them down to where our motor to warm them up. So they stayed on the deck, and we just covered them up.
You were in a sea. You said it was a 6. The 6 meaning 6 feet.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so 6 feet high. Your boat is going up and down in the water. You got the bodies, and you got the men going up and down. As the boat is going up and down, what did you use? Some sort of hook to grab them?
They had hooks on there. Then the other boys that went into the water had a rope around them. They had a life jacket on, but a little rope tied around them.
Now these were your men.
That's right.
Oh, okay.
All the cutters had the same equipment as far as that's concerned.
So these were the guys that were jumping in the water
Yes.
to help get the men on board.
That's right. And generally in our cutter, we took the smallest men, and I was one of the smallest men. I was 150 pounds. We had 3 boys on there, weighed about 200 pounds. So we left them on the cutter because then they could be easily hoist them onto the cutter.
Right.
But we would, and I don't remember. I've seen pictures of some of the cutters of having the hooks where they got them and pulled them in. I don't remember ours having any of that at all.
Tell me about the men that you were pulling in. Some were wounded. Some may not have been wounded because they're both swamped. And
Right.
They were just swimming
Just
in the water.
drowning.
And pulling a guy out of the water, even having help, and the boats are in 6 feet high water. That's a difficult task. It's
It
hard
is.
enough trying to get into a rowboat when you're in the water and having 2 people lift you in.
Manny, that's exactly right, because you had to watch their head. Their head, even though they're wounded or not wounded, might hit the side of our wooden boat. Our little cutters were all wooden, not metal. And the purpose of that was we could go into the beaches and not hit the mines that were in there. If we were metal, we would contact those landmines that they'd put out.
Right,
So that was thought of by the Navy or the Coast Guard before we ever did the invasion.
right.
But we did have to watch very carefully. We'd get a hold of them to get them on our cutters.
So we've got about 10 to 11 men on the cutter heading back to the Navy ship.
Yes,
Now this hospital ship
yes.
that you brought them back to, how were these men lifted from the cutter onto the boat?
They had a gangway, and the one we went to had a plank waiting for you on the side of it, up and down. And all we had to do is go alongside of it. They had many sailors right in there to help us get them off. When we got there, they took them off our cutters. Mine didn't touch a man then.
Right.
But we just got alongside, very easy it was, and they would take them off.
The temperature of the water must have been very cold.
48 degrees. Yes, you
Right.
couldn't stay in that water very long.
Right.
And really, I remember the sound of the cannons going off. That's all. I don't remember any guns, bullets hitting near my cutter. I do not. Only thing I got, I didn't no wounds, but all I got was a wet butt. That's all I did, a wet, cold butt.
Now, the sailors that jumped into the water,
Yes.
they must have been taking off their clothes and changing their clothes as
No,
often as they could.
didn't have time to do anything like that.
Were they wearing any special type
No,
of
we did
diving
not.
suits?
We had nothing but a life jacket on and a rope that was tied.
Right.
They were
So
all
these
that
guys
way.
were jumping in with their shorts,
Just
which
what
were
we
like
had on.
bathing suits.
No. We had nothing, just like we had our regular dungarees. That was it. That's all.
I wonder why they didn't prepare them to have shorts like a bathing suit. So when they knew they were going to have to possibly go into the water, and to pull these men out, not to have that extra weight of the Navy pants and the jeans getting wet and working with that, and just being able, even if they had to jump in there naked to get the men in. But
You have to go to the higher echelon of officers who were planning the invasion. Did they think about that or not? But none of the cutters, none of the boys just had shorts or anything else. Everybody was dressed the same way in our jeans.
how many times should I say did you return to pick up men?
I can only remember really 2 trips. It was so far out and so slow and so heated. It took so long to get them to the water, take them out there. I can only remember actually 2 trips we made, and all my crew right now are deceased that I know of. I've contacted most of them. They're gone. But the stories they told me, that they couldn't say how many we saved. Where it was 10, where it was 2, where it was 20. I don't remember. There was one cutter, and he was Lieutenant McPhail, and he received the Navy Cross. And he got that. They saved 127 men. Now that's really working. And they did get into the beach. They got in also, pardon me, they pulled a small boat. I think it was an LCM or something. They pulled it clear into the beach. It got disabled, and this Lieutenant McPhail got a line onto this LCM and pulled him right to the beach. And they got away safe. That his men did a wonderful job of saving the hunter. They are the ones, we Coast Guard guys were proud of ourselves, but we were proud of Lieutenant McPhail.
I find it very difficult to understand why in the historical movies, the movies that people enjoy to learn about D-Day and what happened on that day, there's so little credit given to the U.S. Coast Guard for their role on D-Day.
Manny, see the picture over here? When I was over for the 7th anniversary, some nice people gave me that picture. And I didn't know what it was. And I'd gone through a magazine, and down below there you'll see that that landing barge right there was a Coast Guard landing barge. People don't know this, but almost 50% of the coxswains that guided those landing barges, or LSTs, into the beaches, all the beaches, were Coast Guard men. That's what they were trained for, was handling small boats. And they were handling the Higgins LCVPs, taking the soldiers, were Coast Guard men.
Jack, I'd like to have you clear up something for myself and anybody who may be viewing this video. You know, when I think of a cutter, I have an idea of what it is, as many may have. But the famous ship anybody thinks about when it comes to ships, although it may have been a Navy ship, and the Coast Guard probably had a number of them in their fleet, a PT boat in comparison to a cutter, what would be the difference?
Quite a bit of difference, really. They carried more armament, naturally. They had torpedoes on them. They would travel 35 knots an hour. We would only go, our top speed was 26. We were wooden, they were built out of different metals. I was never on a PT boat. I had friends from the service who were on there, but they were completely different than us. We were 83 foot long. I don't know exactly how long the PT boats were, like John Kennedy was on and so on. But ours was slower, and I don't know what crew they had, but they had twice as much as we did. All we could do is really do a little bit of with our depth charges while we were on the East Coast before D-Day. We'd go up and down the East Coast. We had 240 cutters that were only made for us. I think the cutter that I was on was made in, it was made on Long Island, matter of fact. I forget the name of the city now, but when I came back to the States, they took my boat to the actually place where it was built to do some work on it. Because we had some railings and all that were torn that we couldn't repair them while we were overseas.
Does Hale Site, Long Island, or Huntington, Long Island ring a bell?
I know about Huntington, but that's not it. And I got an old map under somewhere, and I marked it out where I went back there.
Right. Because I knew that Long Island was involved with building different type of ships for the military.
I understood there was a little over 50 made there. There's made other places too, but there's only 240 of these Coast Guard cutter 83 foot that were manufactured.
June 6th, you've been out in the water for a number of hours now. Were you getting any news as to how it was going on land? Nothing.
We crew members, I don't think our skipper did either. Manny, I did forget one thing. Excuse me. We were originally assigned to Utah Beach. There was enough, I hate to use this term, but there wasn't enough action, I guess, there to keep us there. We had 15 cutters at Utah Beach. Our skipper, some way or another, which we didn't know, got orders or got some way to go over to Omaha Beach, divert us, and they're not far apart, but go over to Omaha Beach and then meet the transports there and then follow the assault boats in. But that all came about.
Were you able to see the guns firing
No,
by
sir.
the Germans from the beaches?
I don't recall that at all, sir.
Let's see. Could you see machine gun fire
Never.
or anything?
And I never saw the beaches.
You never saw the
No.
beaches?
Maybe some of the crew member, but even when it got light, I never saw that at all.
Do you remember if there were any artillery hits close by to your boat at any time?
No. I could hear the guns going off, but we never saw anything, any bullets or any water splatter or anything else around us. Because we weren't really close to the landing barges or the LSDs until something happened. Then we could almost see that happen. It was lighting up. And then we would run in real quick and do that's what all the rescue boats did.
Now, June 6th, what time of the day do you recall when you stopped going back searching in the water? And where did you return to with your boat? Did you go back to the ship that, the Liberty boat that dropped you off? Did they hoist you back up? Or were you in the water, and how long was that boat in the water?
But see, we started out from Poole, England. We were no longer on the Liberty ship there. We were taken off, and we went out just our cutter, see. We stayed around the beaches and for 2.5 days. Because, see, we had to go back. We carried 900 gallons of gas, but we had to go back to get the fuel back to our base in Poole, England. So we couldn't stay too long.
You were running on gasoline, not diesel?
No, just gasoline, high-powered gasoline. We had 2 tanks and 2 propellers.
And how many gallons did that boat hold?
900,000. We had 900,000. 900 gallons of gas.
900 gallons of gas?
Yes, sir.
And there was enough gas, you knew how many gallons you would need to get back to England?
We left that to our chief machinist. They handled all that. And he would tell the skipper when we ought to go back. And we did. On the second day of the invasion, after we'd done our job there, second day, we went into Le Havre, right in almost. We saw a pilot coming down. He was parachuting in. We didn't know if he was German or he was American. But we went in, and then we did. I will say that we were shot at then. There were bullets all around us then. Now, this is the second day. We went in and saved that pilot.
Was it strafing?
He'd been shot at. The plane was destroyed, and he was parachuting into the water, into Le Havre, is where he's going. We picked him up, and he was a Canadian pilot. He had a big cut on his leg, where I don't know if it was a bullet or he was jumping out of the plane that was destroyed. Anyway, he had a big cut on. We had a young boy by the name of Carl Wesley. And he wasn't a pharmacist or anything, but boy, he took hold and bandaged that up for him. And we saved his life on the second day. Got him to a hospital ship.
Do you ever know his name?
Never did, but some of the boys said Joe Ciano, who's now deceased, said at one time he did contact him. He had written down something he didn't know, and he ran him down in Canada.
That's a wonderful story.
It is.
That's amazing.
And then, I guess it was on the second day also, I got credit for it, and I swear I don't know it. I got credit for shooting down a German plane. And
where did that happen, Jack?
that just off the coast of Omaha Beach.
That was off the coast.
There was a German mine laying plane come in, just like this. And there were several shots being fired, but just by luck, we had the Commander Simpson on our boat that day. He wanted to go into the beaches. He wanted to get closer. So we picked him up off the one of the big ships, Augusta or whatever it was he was on, and he came with us. And we had him in, and just happened to be that day that I took over the 20mm gun. And he said, I saw the tracer bullets go into the fuselage of that plane, Jack, and you got credit. Now, I can remember this, and I swear I didn't know anything about it. I didn't see it or knew I was going to get credit for it, and didn't know that until I came home, and there was a newspaper article in our paper that Jack Hamlin shot down a German strafing plane. Oh.
That's amazing.
It is.
That's really amazing.
And you don't know that you get home.
So, on what day do you remember bringing Commander Simpson? That was the second day?
Second day.
That was the June 7th.
Same day it happened that we went into Le Havre and picked up the
Navy,
he was aboard,
the Canadian pilot.
He was aboard then. We picked that plane.
You headed back to England on June 7th.
Yes.
You went into Cherbourg.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what did you do in Cherbourg?
For a while we were doing a little bit of convoy duty, going in and out of there, waiting for some of the transports bringing the soldiers in. Then we just that's all we did for a while. We put our depth charges back on. During the invasion we took those off because they were too heavy. But we put them back on and just did a little bit of a rescue, well, you can call it air rescue or just transporting, helping the large transports come in.
Right. What month was that you were in Cherbourg?
It was in October.
October. So it's October now, 1944.
Yes, sir.
Just less than 6 months, or about 6 months before the war's coming to an end.
Yeah.
You're listening to the news. Did you spend the rest of the time in France, or did you go back to England?
No, I stayed in Cherbourg, and Manny, on Christmas Eve of 1944, we got, and before I tell you this story, I was having a little party aboard the cutter. We only had a crew of 8, but I had met a master sergeant in the Army. He was a quartermaster. And he said, Jack, I work at the hospital with a bunch of French nurses. He says, and he always come down a while and played cards with us. We'd have a good time. He says, why don't we have a little party Christmas Eve? He says, I'll bring a couple of nurses down, female nurses. I'll bring a little wine, and I'll bring a turkey. I can take care of that. I'm a quartermaster. And he said, why don't we have a little on your boat? I said, let's do that. But I said, it'll be Christmas Eve, and I have 4 boys on. I mean, I'm going to give liberty to 4 of my crew and get them off the boat. We'll have more room. The reason I did that, I took the 4 of the best looking ones. I thought the best looking boys, because I wanted them to go ashore while we had the 2 girls and all of our meal. We just got started. He brought the wine down. The girls were aboard. And this was about 6 o'clock in the evening, and we got a call that there's trouble off buoy so-and-so, 5 miles off Cherbourg. Well, I don't know why. I knew they were nurses, and Lord, we could have taken them out. We could sure use them. Anyway, I put them ashore, and this Army sergeant, I said, you got to go with us. I said, the other crews, I'm going to need you to help us go out to what the trouble is. We get out, and it's the Leopoldville transport with 2,000 of the 66th Black Panther Division had been torpedoed. And I tell you, when we pulled alongside, there's a few other boats went out to rescue also, but when we got there, the soldiers were all lined up. They all had their guns, and they had their heavy overcoats on, Christmas Eve, of course. Well, before long, the transport started to sink. And a few of them started jumping in the water, and we'd pick them up. And then finally, they wouldn't jump. And when I pulled alongside of the Leopoldville, of course it's about 20 or 25 feet above me. And I asked the boys, I said, your transport is going to sink. Why don't you jump right now? Well, 2 of them jumped. One broke his arm, and the other one broke another bone, as far as that's concerned. The rest of them would not jump. So I pulled away from the Leopoldville to the outside. Then pretty soon they started jumping in. Well, Manny, of course, with those big heavy overcoats on and the guns and everything, they just jumped in. Well, hitting that water, it was hard to pick them up. I mean, really hard. There was they lost 800 and some odd men that night. It was a huge disaster. The 22nd Infantry.
And the name of the ship again, Jack?
Leopoldville.
Leopoldville.
Now, the crew of the Leopoldville got into the lifeboats first. The crew, they were Belgian Congo, all black. They got into the lifeboats first and the skipper stayed aboard. He went down with the Leopoldville. But the soldiers didn't know how to operate these the lifeboats, and a lot of them were swinging back and forth, and they couldn't get them loose. They were probably all rusted anyway, and they hadn't been used. They weren't alerted, and I got pictures in my room that 2 of those people we pulled out of the water Christmas Eve came to see me, and I had a wonderful visit with them. Our crew saved 1 man this night, and he was from Colorado. He came all the way down because he had a daughter that her husband was superintendent of schools up here in Missouri. And he came to see them, so they called me up, Jack, would you come up and see our father? Well, that's the first meeting I met with anybody that we saved. And we had a wonderful visit at the school.
Tell me, the Leopoldville was a civilian ship?
No, it was an old transport of Belgium, I believe it was.
So it was a military ship?
Military ship.
It was a military ship.
And the government had taken it over for transporting the infantry to the shore.
Were you ever interviewed during the war or after the war as far as what you saw, what you witnessed about this particular boat?
No, sir. Never about the Leopoldville. I have.
Did you remember seeing any articles about it, news articles?
Oh yes, later on. And as a matter of fact, about 5 years ago, a man called me from Cincinnati. He wrote books on the Leopoldville, thinking the night before Christmas. It was called. Oh gosh, isn't that terrible? I can't think of his name right now. But he called me. He says, Jack, there is a Canadian filming production. It's going to go back over, and they're going to send a diver down. They found where the Leopoldville is. Well, I didn't get to, he asked me if I wanted to go, and I said, yes, I'll be glad to go over there. Well, it ended up I didn't get to go. Something else happened. They got somebody else. But they went down, and they took pictures of the Leopoldville, and it was standing right up. Wasn't broken apart or anything, but the Leopoldville was just like it was sitting on a dock. And he sent me a picture of it, and I've got it here somewhere. And the man's name was Andres, Andres, and he has written 2 books.
On the Leopoldville?
On the Leopoldville.
Well, I'd like to research that a little bit more.
You can get it.
Yeah, find out about that. That seems like a very, very horrible disaster.
It was.
And do you remember what month that was? You said it was Christmas.
Christmas Eve. And also, you could see some of the boys jump. There was a tugboat came alongside, but they'd thrown the anchor out on the Leopoldville, and they couldn't move the ship. Nobody was there to remove the anchor. If they got there as soon as they got there, if they could have got a hold of it, they could have taken it ashore. We were 5 miles out, but they had enough time. The tugboat could have got the Leopoldville into shore, but they did not. So that's some. And I met a man here in Springfield that happened to be on the Leopoldville, and he was a track man when he was in Troy, Missouri, in high school. And when one of the boats came alongside, they rescued about 500 on one boat that came alongside, a cruiser. And he jumped. And he said, Jack, it's a good thing I did. My buddies wouldn't jump. But I got back and I jumped. And I jumped across at least 15 foot of water. And the boat's going up and down like this. As I hit a metal deck, it hit my head. But I was so happy. I didn't break a bone or anything. But I jumped. And I landed over and saved my life. The other guys would not jump. But some of the boys did jump. They'd get in between the ships and they're smashed. And in the book, they can tell you about all the stories, how many were killed that way.
Being smashed in between the boats.
Smashed between the boats.
Jack, tell me about VE Day. Where were you when the Germans surrendered?
I was back in the States. I got back in the States.
Now, did you get back for an R&R?
No, I had enough points, whatever they call it then, that I was sent back to the States.
And were you released from your active service?
Absolutely. As soon as I got back here, I was released.
Do you remember when that was?
November the 5th.
November 5th?
45.
1945.
Yes, sir.